De aquella viene la revolución, para que se asustan será para mejor. Es el pueblo entero el que ya está gritando, ¡viva la revolución!
Iranian nuclear weapons development.
They have turned the island into a communist hellhole.
The experiment in Venezuela has failed completely.
La bestialidad imperialista. Bestialidad que no tiene una frontera determinada ni pertenece a un país determinado. Bestias fueron las hordas hitleristas, como bestias son los norteamericanos hoy, como bestias son los paracaidistas belgas, como bestias fueron los imperialistas franceses en Argelia. Porque es la naturaleza del imperialismo la que bestializa a los hombres, la que la convierte en fieras sedientas de sangre que están dispuestas a degollar, a asesinar, a destruir hasta la última imagen de un revolucionario, de un partidario de un régimen que haya caído bajo su bota o que luche por su libertad. Y la estatua que recuerda a Lumumba, hoy destruida pero mañana reconstruida, nos recuerda también en la historia trágica de ese mártir de la revolución del mundo, que no se puede confiar en el imperialismo, pero ni tantito, nada.
Москвой, слышу песни, говор и смех. Я хожу и любуюсь Москвой, слышу песни, говор и смех. И летит над моей головой чистый снег, добрый снег, русский снег.
Опять уезжая от вас, и с любовью приветствуя всех. И опять уезжая от вас, и с любовью приветствуя всех. Разговор еще вспомнит не раз чистый снег, добрый снег. Русский снег.
Светлый путь двум народам открыт, нет для дружбы преграды помех. Светлый путь двум народам открыт, нет для дружбы преграды помех. И как белое чудо летит чистый снег, добрый снег, русский снег.
Coming in hot with some beautiful music from the Soviet era of friendship between the peoples of India and the peoples of the Soviet Union, at an era where the revolutionary movements in India fighting for socialism against capitalism. And believe it or not, India at one point was seen as a big prospect for creating something like China and the Soviet Union. The West was very fearful of a united socialist India. Amazing, beautiful music. What's up, everybody? Welcome to episode 89, Unmasking Imperialism, exposing imperialist propaganda in mainstream media. Today, neoliberalism in India, exposing the disastrous impact of neoliberal economic policies in India, capitalism on steroids, unhinged capitalism, capitalism that's not on a leash, that destroys and blood sucks out of our working class people. During today's episode, we're going to discuss how the so-called free market, which the libertarians love to talk about, has devastated the South Asian country of India. We're going to shed light on how neoliberalism has destroyed workers' rights, students' rights, children's lives, food sovereignty, agriculture, and the environment in India. And we're also going to talk about the psychological impact of Western colonialism, imperialism, and capitalism in India. And joining me today is an amazing comrade, a good friend, Comrade Saheli Chowdhury, Bengali content creator and millennial interested in history and popular movements in the global South. Saheli works for the Venezuela-based online news outlet, Orinoco Tribune. Please subscribe to Orinoco Tribune. Please show them some love. A very amazing publication out in Venezuela, independent, revolutionary. Go show them some love. Saheli, it's so great to have you on. I hope everything is well. How's everything on your end?
Thanks a lot to you for inviting me for the second time to this show, which I have been following for a long time. So, of course, thanks a lot. That's fine. I mean, we can start.
For sure. No, thank you so much for joining. And I think it's important to really discuss. First of all, India has, I think, if one of the biggest, if not the biggest population. Is that true? India has the largest population in the world, right?
But it will, in a year or two, it will cross China. So yes, it's close to China. Still second, but it will be first by 2025.
That's great. That's what, 3 years from now. So by 2025, India is going to be the country with the largest population in the world. We should all be following what's going on in India. And that's what baffles me, honestly, is like even in the West, just how little coverage we get of India. I mean, this is an important country. And I think India in the future, with its population boom, with its economy, with its revolutionary potential, especially with a communist party like the Communist Party of India, Marxist, that, in my opinion, is one of the most disciplined, organized militant parties in the world. I think there's so much to look out for, especially as a communist. So I think if people want to understand not only what communist organizing looks like today in the 21st century, but also prospective socialist countries in the future, I think we have to study what's going on in India, the good and the bad, because unfortunately, there's a lot of bad happening right now. We have the government of the BJP. I'm not exactly sure what BJP stands for. If I try to even pronounce it, I'd butcher it. So I don't. What does it stand for again?
Okay, so the full form of BJP is Bharatiya Janata Party, which means the People's Party of India. So
How ironic.
Actually, that's interesting how parties, right-wing, especially extreme right-wing parties around the world, go on naming themselves People's Parties.
Yeah, no, it's insane. It's like the Republican Party, the Democratic Party. And the BJP is as neoliberal as it gets. They, just to break it down for people who are unfamiliar with what exactly neoliberal economics is. So you have different contending theories in economics. You have what they call classical economics or market economies. This is Adam Smith, Wealth of Nations. This is John Locke. This is what they call the classics of free market capitalism, where they believe that the minimal state there is, the better. Everything should be owned privately by private citizens, and you should only care about your individual wants and needs. And this really gave birth to the mercantile era, the slave era, the rise of colonialism with the US and the UK and France and all the imperialist European powers. This free market idea that choice and individualism should determine the economic system, the mode of production, right? That is the economic mode of production of capitalism, of neoliberal, of liberalism. classical liberalism. Then what happened toward the 20th century is that you ran into some problems. We had the imperialist powers, the US, the European powers. We're seeing one of the fundamental laws of capitalism begin to manifest, which is rampant inequality. The rich get richer, the poor get poorer, and the richer get larger by the day. The poor get larger by the day, the richer get smaller by the day. And they needed a way to resolve that, to remedy that, to save capitalism. And so you have John Maynard Keynes, this British economist, who begins promoting Keynesianism, which in the US would be kind of like what the Democrats are doing with the Biden, Build Back Better and Biden, and these spending bills, which in appearance seem progressive, seem good because they're spending money on public infrastructure and stuff like that, but it's still following the fundamental laws of capitalism, and those fundamental contradictions of capitalism are still going to manifest. And so what happened is that once Keynesianism became more popular, then you have the rise of neoliberalism. People like Milton Friedman, the University of Chicago, a lot of these Friedrich Hayek, and all these people who began promoting the ideas of the original liberalism, economic liberalism, but on steroids. Privatize everything, privatize water, privatize air, everything, support coup. And it also became more violent too. Like, that's the ironic part, is that in theory, liberalism is all about, no coercion, no force. We don't want intervention. Everybody is just free to do their own thing. It's kind of anarchisty in a way. But neoliberalism, what kind of defined it is that it used force, brutal force, like we saw in the 1973 coup in Chile with Pinochet. We saw in the 70s and 80s across Latin America and the Caribbean, in the 80s and the 90s with the dismantling of the Soviet Union, forcible. And neoliberalism, not only in terms of economics, is like capitalism on steroids, where it just completely privatizes everything. It also uses violent repression and state force. The only state funding they want is for police and military. So it's really disaster. That is, in a nutshell, again, right? People are, I'm sure, going to comment like, oh, actually, that's like a dummy's guide to neoliberalism. It's capitalism on steroids. It's really fucked up. It values the market. It values individuals and property over the collective, over human beings. And that's what India is governed by today. That is the system that has kept India in chronic poverty and homelessness, despair. Compare India to China, right? To Russia, at a time when, imagine, like China and Russia had their socialist revolutions. They had so much development, and whatever contradictions there are today, or it's not perfect or whatever, but so much has been accomplished. But because the Indian communist movement was so brutally repressed in the 20th century, India, in a sense, kind of missed a step. It was stunted in its growth. So you have so much feudal economy in parts of India that's combined with a rampant neoliberalism. Comrade Saheli, what are your thoughts, just in general? Like, explain to us what the situation. Like, you're from India, you're Bengali. Like, tell us, before actually telling us about that, tell us about like where your family comes from, in India. What was it like growing up in India, and like how India is today? What is the reality for Indians today?
Okay, so my family actually comes from what is today Bangladesh. So they were like refugees at the time of partition, and they were in like a part of the family father's side lived in an industrial city called Asansol. It's in the west. It's the western part of West Bengal, whereas my mother's family lived in around Kolkata. And like my mother's family had a dairy business, and my father's side actually had some small amounts of land in Bangladesh. Like, they were small landholders, but here, like in West Bengal, of course, they had nothing. So my grandfather, who has passed away now, he worked in a glass factory, and like my parents grew up in that sort of situation in just after the partition. So that's where I am from. I'm from from Kolkata, which is in the capital of West Bengal, just the southern part of the state. So yes, like I think this many people in the world can feel this. I also come from what we call a divided nation, and by nation I don't really just mean India, because India is a country, but in India nationhood is tied to language, to culture. So we consider like as Bengali nation, and yes, our homeland remains divided, and it was divided by British colonialism, and of course from their collaborators within India. So that is how I would say, that's where I am from. Anyway, so if we are talking about how India is like today, just like you said, it's a country of neoliberalism, and like you said, mm, the only state intervention that neoliberalism wants is military and police. I would add another thing: they also want tax breaks for the rich. So they want the profit to be individualized, they want the profit to be theirs. But whenever there is a loss, they like socialism very much.
Yeah.
They would want the loss to be socialized, to be spread to all the people of the country. So at present, like if at present there is this controversy around the word freebie. So they are trying to call social welfare programs freebies, and there is even a case in the Supreme Court going on that political parties should not be promising to give freebies to people in the run up to elections during the electoral campaign. Now, of course, there are some things that political parties do which really are freebies. That is, first of all, the tax breaks for the corporates, and then there are, for example, at present, West Bengal is ruled by also by a right-wing party, and I call it a tin pot fascist party because it has fascist ideologies, but it is tin pot because it isn't that effective. So what what it does actually is it tries to give, okay, it's drowned in corruption, like it has drowned the state in corruption. But what it has tried instead is to distract people's attention from it by giving people really freebies, like very small amounts of money every month, or very small amounts of food, what we call rations every month, but not to everyone. They have this below poverty line and above poverty line, and even there is corruption, that the people who are close to them or something, they give them those cards so that they can access those things, and people who are really poor cannot, or things like that. So there are some things that are freebies, but if you are going to call free education freebies, or a strong healthcare system that people can access is freebies, or stuff like that, or like if you are think that giving subsidies to in fuel prices or electricity prices as freebies, then that's a problem. So that is the problem that is going on in the highest court of the country at present, what to call freebies and what to not, and whether political parties should be allowed to even promise anything in their electoral campaigns. So that's a way. I see it also as a tendency towards fascism, because um, I mean, in the electoral campaigns, yes, if you have a corrupt party that is ruling your land, or if you have a party that is not doing enough or not doing anything in social welfare, you can promise to do it, and if you do not, then people will vote you out again. So there is no worry about that part. The problem is that if you are going to stop that thing, and they're saying no political party can even say anything in their pamphlets, they cannot promise free healthcare in their pamphlets or something like that, then that is definitely a tendency towards fascism, and also clamp down on free speech, I would say.
For sure. Definitely. Thank you for that rundown and clarification on fascism. And I think it's interesting to point out as well, because when we talk about fascism, people tend to only focus on Germany, Italy, and European fascism. And it's interesting because there is fascism in India. And it's interesting to note as well that in many ways, the Nazis and Hitler himself was an admirer of the fascist elements in India, supported by colonization, of course, propped up by colonization, that have very fascistic understandings of humanity, where they view some people as lower and some people as higher, especially the caste system. Can you kind of break down what the societal breakdown is in India in regards to that, in regards to the caste system, and how that ties in with poverty going on today?
So, firstly, although India is in neoliberal capitalism, it's also like the basic structure remains feudal. So even when during like when the British were colonizing India, they did not touch the feudal structure because that actually supported them, because as long as you were not like as long as they were not interfering with the feudal structure, the feudal lords did not have anything to lose in the colonial system, like, as long as they were collaborating and as long as nobody was touching the other's interests. So that system remained, and even after independence, that system remained. Now, that feudal system also is greatly tied to and depends on the caste system as well as the religious segregation in the country, which I should also mention, because I mean that was the reason behind partition. Let's remember. So, like you said, eh, Hitler and other Nazis, Mussolini also were admirers of the fascist elements within India. It was actually mutual. I mean, that love was mutual. So, on the Indian side, mm, the present day BJP originated from what the BJP originated from was exactly that. So it was the precursor of BJP was called Jan Sangh. It was founded in 1925, but the ideas actually existed from a century before, like from the latter half of the 19th century, that they were saying that India is basically not a country, but the two different peoples within a same country, two different peoples who can never be together, referring to Hindus and Muslims. Now, before going into Hindus and Muslims, I should also point out the population, because there is a fear mongering in this part of the world. It's like a replacement theory, like a replacement theory, is that what the BJP banks its entire politics is that Hindus are in danger, Muslims are taking over. Now, if you look at the population of the country, like 83% is Hindu, and like around 15% is Muslim, and the rest would be Christians, would be Parsi, would be like Sikhs, Buddhists, etc. So it's like there is no need to fear, in the sense that it's not like Hindus are in danger in terms of their numbers getting reduced or anything. These numbers actually have more or less been like this for ages, let's say, because unlike the Spanish colonialists in America, like the American continent, who had forcibly evangelized the entire population, like or most of the population in India. Of course, I'm not comparing colonialism with the empires of the Middle Ages. So whenever in the Middle Ages, during the Islamic Empire in India, the Muslim rulers actually did not forcibly convert everyone, because if they wanted, the whole of India would be Muslim today. But they hadn't. I mean, they were happy as long as they got their taxes and people could do everything else they wished. So this has been the percentages of the populations along religious lines from like 700, 800 years, I say. So there is no need for this fear. So this is a fear mongering tactic. So that is why I am calling it a fascism, because just like fascism in the European fascism, because people know this, European fascism, they were like at least Hitler was like, Jews are taking over this or that. In India, what BJP says is that Muslims are taking over this and that. So along the religious lines, that's the division. Now, if you're talking about caste, so actually the caste system is terribly complicated and it's very difficult to break it down within a few words. But what actually is that, and this system has existed here for like 2000 years. So, and it had originated after the Aryans had come to India, and not just definitely after, but actually there were two waves of Aryan migration in India, and the second wave would be like around 180, and at around that time the caste system started to originate, and there would be uppermost caste, the Brahmins, then there would be another caste who would be the warriors and all that. Then there would be the people who had lands and people who were doing business. And finally, at the bottom would be everybody in the working class. Okay, so that is the largest section. And of course, even within those classes, sorry, even in those castes, there are subcastes, and because it has existed for 2000 years and India is a huge country, in different parts of India the caste system manifests itself in different ways. However, since the lowest caste is the working class and it has remained like that in every part of the country forever, like at least as long as the caste system has existed, so these people actually could not own land, they could not own anything, they could not even have access to, let's say, water wells or access to temples or anything. So this actually continues to remain like untouchability remains a problem in India, that there are certain castes, even among the lower castes there are certain subcastes who are supposed to be untouchable, and if someone from the higher caste touches them, they are like supposed to go through a lot of things, and they also lynch people because of this. This is uh, there are incidents, and they're increasing because BJP fans the flames in order to consolidate its vote bank, as we say it here. Is that mm, there has been incidents in which people who are considered lower castes, like people who live on, for example, tanning animal skins and stuff like that. So they, when they have walked through a village road or something, they have been lynched and said that you have made this place unholy, or that in many other cases there is, of course, there is this idea that mm, lower caste men would like to marry higher caste women, like they have a fetish or something like that. And there is this there have been like honor killings because of this, like people actually have killed their own daughters and do this, because they
Crazy.
have like married outside their caste or something like that. So that is the that is the way in which caste system exists. Like it, at the same time, it takes away the rights of the economically backward classes, and as well as women, it also takes away the rights of women. So it's a very conservative and deeply patriarchal society, and capitalism loves it because it does not, I mean, if it did not, it would not have touched this, it would have touched this system. It has in certain ways, because in cities actually what happens is that this caste system gets more diluted, because in cities everybody has to like do some kind of work or something in order to earn the smallest amount of money to survive. And there are different types of works in rural areas and urban areas. So in urban areas the caste system gets a lot diluted, but in rural ones it does not, or even in semi-rural ones it does not. Or when it comes to certain cases, like when I have been to different parts of India where people actually ask your name, and they would ask your full name in order to ascertain what is your caste. Like they would also like to know your surname, and then they
Damn.
would ask you where you are from, and then there are many other things that this way they would
People, they're
ascertain whether they
nosy.
should in this way they would ascertain whether they would let you enter their homes, or whether they would give you food, or whether you can like be in the same place with them or something like that. So that is the situation in which the caste system exists in many parts of the country, not everywhere. Like you wouldn't find this sort of system in the cities. I'm not saying not at all, but you might not find it to be as nosy as you say in cities, but in rural areas it's definitely like that. And it can also be dangerous. So this is the system on which not just BJP, actually a lot of political parties actually depend on it in order to consolidate their vote banks, because they would make overtures to certain parts of the population. So there are parties that would like to be closer to the lower castes, not out of the class question, but because of they get votes from them. Then there is BJP, which originally actually was closer to the upper castes, but at present it has been able to break what we call caste equations in many parts of India, and has got votes from the lower caste peoples also, with their all their tirade against Muslims and all this anti-Muslim ideology that they have created, which they have perfected in recent times, because I want the Hindus to be united against the Muslims who are like taking over the country. So that is like, this is where the caste system and the religious divides intersect in the country, and this is on which a lot of politics revolves, instead of revolving around the class question, let's say.
Crazy, crazy stuff. By the way, shout out to everybody who's watching and listening. Shout out to Ian. Shout out to Tian Wang. Shout out to Big Teal, to Ware Program, to Wadi. If you guys have any questions or comments, go ahead and throw them in the chat. Very interesting stuff. And I think this is important as well to study, because we're talking about a civilization that is thousands of years old, 4,000, 5,000 years old. And in my opinion, I think India within the next decade will be a global power that everyone's going to be talking about, and major world events will include India, because of its population, because of so many things that are going on. What I want to do is I want to play a clip. This is an interesting documentary, a part of a documentary that I found about child poverty in India, and it's just really crazy to me. I've told the story before. One of my first introductions to being a communist, when I was about 8 or 9 years old, I went with my family to Honduras, where my family's from. And it was the first time I went back to Honduras, and I was actually like old enough to think about things or to reflect on things. And one of the first sights I saw was a little girl who, first of all, was naked, like barely naked. She had like little shorts or something, but she was like a street child, and she had a big belly. She was really skinny, but she had a big belly. You can tell from worms or whatever, stomach infection. And she had one arm, and she was looking for food in a dumpster. And she was about my age. She was about 8 or 9 years old. I was about 8 or 9 years old. I'm coming from the US. I'm well fed. I'm clothed. I'm clean. And in that instant, I didn't have the words to describe it. I didn't know what capitalism was. I didn't know what imperialism or neoliberalism was. But that, to me, like, woke me up as like the global class divide, to see that there are kids who are my age in my own country and in countries all over the world who live some of the harshest poverties because of the system called capitalism and neoliberalism. So for me, that was very impactful. And then in 2012, no, I always forget the year, 2014, my apologies, 2014, when I went to Bangladesh, to Dhaka, and I remember walking the streets and seeing little brothers, like 2 little brothers, maybe like 4 or 5 years old, orphans, selling gum, selling candy in the street, and they had nothing. Like, they literally had nothing on them. And I also saw, when we were driving to the airport, when we were leaving Dhaka on the way to the airport, I saw this lady who, it was 2 women, a younger woman and an older woman. It was a daughter and her mother. And the mother was on the street literally dying. Like, she was on the floor dying. She was like I remember seeing that. Like, we were in the car, and she was like, hold on, let me get the camera right. She was like that, like reaching out like that, her mom. And then her daughter was like crying out for help and stuff like that, out of pure starvation and hunger. And then you come here to the US, you're in Venezuela, and you see the amount of waste that goes into food. Like, people just throw out food, like, and just the way capitalism is in terms of the irrationality of everything. That, to me, like, those are 2 events that I saw in real life that I was like, holy crap. So I do want to share this clip, and we'll talk a little bit about, how exactly neoliberalism in India has thrown more people into poverty, especially children. I think that's the really fucked up part. So I'm going to play a little bit of this, and we'll talk more about that.
In the laneways of Old Delhi, a young editor and reporter are about to show me an unusual revival taking place across the country. Here in this sweaty time capsule of ink and machine, Shambhu and Jyoti are printing almost 10,000 copies of a newspaper made entirely by street kids. Right now, around the world, papers are dying. But in India, the print industry is experiencing an incredible boom. This paper is called Balaknama. In Hindi, that means voice of the children, and it's being read by people as far away as London and the USA. What's more surprising is Shambhu and Jyoti and everyone at the paper are street kids.
ये सबसे खुशखबरी बात है कि ये खुद एक बच्चे चलाते हैं, जो कि शायद इतना बड़ा काम तो बड़े लोग भी करते हैं। हम बच्चे जो सड़क पे रहते हैं, जिसे समाज घिनने करते हैं, जो लोग बोलते हैं कि ये बच्चा कुछ नहीं कर सकता। इसमें खासियत बात है कि हम किसी और बड़े लोग के या भी बड़े बच्चे की न्यूज़ नहीं छापते, स्पेशली ये सड़क पे रहने वाले बच्चों की ही खबर छपता है और उनकी आवाज़ें पहुंचती हैं।
Jyoti's excited. She's never seen a paper printed before.
Do you want to become the editor of Balaknama one day?
हाँ, मैं बालकनामा का एडिटर बनना चाहती हूँ, क्योंकि क्या नाम है, जैसे हमारे शंभू भैया है, तो मेरे मन में खुशी होता कि काश मैं होती तो मैं हर बच्चों की स्टोरी अच्छा छाप देती।
India's street kids are the poorest of the poor. Nicknamed the invisible children because they live in the city's shadows. This camp is 16-year-old Jyoti's home. She's the paper's most senior reporter, but Jyoti and her mum have just enough food for tonight.
मेरी ज़िंदगी में जैसे कि जब मैं पत्रकार बनी तो मेरे पहले क्या था कि मेरे घर में कोई जल्दी नहाता धोता नहीं था, सारे गंदे रहते थे। तो मैं क्या करती थी, अब मैं नहाती धोती थी, मुझे अजीब लगता था कि मैंने इस तीसरी से जुड़ी, वो मेरी सारी ज़िंदगी में ही होता है।
Her home is a slum next to this major bus stop. For years, she's watched people pass her without a second thought.
जो लोग अच्छे होते हैं, उन लोग का हमारे आंखों में गलत लगते हैं कि जो बंदे यहाँ लोग रहते हैं वो गलत है, वो चोरियाँ करते हैं, शराब पीते हैं, मतलब गंदी उनके मुंह में वर्डें आती है। बल्कि वो बंदा पूछ ही नहीं सकता हमसे कि तुम क्यों रह रहे हो जगह पर। दुनिया को ये जानना चाहिए कि जैसे मैं जी रही हूँ वैसे हर बच्चे ना जिए।
There are at least 2 million street kids who live like Jyoti in India. At Balaknama, she's one of only 60 kid reporters from the slums. So they have an enormous task, trying to give a voice to those who feel ignored and invisible. Out here in the slums, the search for a good story starts early.
क्या नाम है, हर लोग के नज़र में मैं एक लड़की हूँ और छोटी हूँ मैं। सब ये कहते हैं कि आप कितना बड़ा काम करते हो, एक दूसरे बच्चों के लिए मदद करते हो।
Jyoti's never been taught journalism, but weaves in and around these slums easily.
हाँ, जैसे कि मेरी खासियत है कि मैं क्या करती हूँ, एक दूसरे बच्चों के साथ घिन-पना नहीं करती हूँ।
और पुलिस वाले बच्चों को
She receives a tip-off about 2 children and finds these young kids alone guarding plastic bottles, which provides the family's only income, leaving them vulnerable to thieves.
अच्छा, कितने बोतल आपने बीने? कितने बोतल बीने आपने? और आपने?
भाई ने बिना और मम्मी ने बिना है।
और तूने नहीं बीना?
It's
One thing I just wanted to comment here that's so crazy is that when I was in Bangladesh, one thing I noticed is that everywhere you go, you see empty plastic bottles everywhere. And one of the reasons for that is that water is privatized. So in a lot of regions, and in India is the same, I would imagine as well, there is no centralized public water system that is able to bring running water to people. So a lot of people are forced to buy bottles of water to even bathe, to drink. And so that those bottles of water then are, where else are they going to go, right? There's no centralized sanitation system. Everything's privatized. So then they either burn it or they sell it. So it just shows you the irrationality of the free market of neoliberalism, So I don't know, Saheli, if you wanted to comment on that.
Actually, it's not even like privatized. I mean, privatized. Of course, there have been some cases where the constitution has been bypassed and everything, but water is not privatized part, and neither is the sanitation system, unlike Chile. However, the problem is that the systems just don't exist. They were never built. There was no reason to the leaders, the so-called leaders of this country, never had any reason to think of the people and think of making their lives better. So what they would do is, uh, in many parts of the country, like in most parts of the country, there is no public supply system of water, and there is no public sanitation system even in big cities. Or even if there is a sanitation system, what happens is that they just go into certain parts of the cities and do not go into others. So it remains that in most places are actually dirty, and since there is no sanitation system and there has been none, and even in cities, I am saying, like, I live in a small town, and there sometimes there is a sanitation system, sometimes there isn't. And in Kolkata there is, but then even you would go into some localities and you would know that the people who actually collect these things, the people of the municipal corporation, they actually do not go into those parts of the city, just because I don't know why they don't go into those parts of the city, but particularly they do not go into slums or regions that are like slums, or slums or semi slums, I should say. So in these parts of cities as well as in parts of the country, but there is neither a public distribution of water nor a public sanitation system, or at least collection of solid waste. What happens is that they do not get water, drinking water, so they would buy bottles. And what happens is that there are people who actually make a living out of bottling water. It's actually not very difficult purifying water to a certain extent so that it can be consumed. So what happens is that even in the southern part of Bengal, for example, closer to the Sundarbans, where there when the water is more contaminated because of it being closer to the sea, what happens is that there are many such small factories which purify water and bottle water and then sell it at a lower price than what you would have for like the corporations are selling water, right? So in these cases, people would buy these water bottles, and not just small ones, they also have big jars, because those on the whole cost less. So people would buy these things, and after a point of time, like after that water is used, what do? If it's a smaller bottle, they just throw it away, because I mean there is no one to collect those things. And in case of larger jars, they actually sell it back to the people who originally sold them the water. So that is the sort of situation happening in the country, that it there is not even any need to privatize anything. You just do not let the systems exist, and the rest is done. So that is the sort of thing happening here.
Most definitely. No, thank you for breaking that down. And this is the kind of this is a site. This is a picture from Bengal, and this is this kind of picture, right? If you were to show this to a Westerner, they'd say, "Oh my God, like how backward they are. Like why are they polluting?" And some white liberal, right, in the U.S., like we need to go in and teach them about environmentalism. It's like no, like they're doing this because of the system that you've implanted there. Like they're trying to survive. They want public and good quality water, but the only thing they can get is this bottled private stuff, and it creates a huge issue, like Comrade Saheli was saying, with pollution, with just the economy, the way everything is structured. It creates a huge, horrible situation that is unlivable, and it's just it's really crazy. Another short clip that I want to play as well. This is about as well. One of the things that is crazy as well is that one of the hardest hit countries from COVID was India, and it didn't really get a lot of attention. We heard it kind of pissed me off because when COVID was going on, you had all these videos about Italians playing their songs and how they're getting through COVID, and the Europeans, and they're getting through it in their nice apartments. But India was hit twice, 3 times, 4 times as hard, and they weren't getting any coverage about that. And things have gotten a lot worse economically, especially because of the lockdowns and COVID in India. So I'm just going to play a little bit of this. This is about COVID and its impact on poverty in India, which I think it just made things even worse. So I'm going to play this, and then we'll talk more about that.
COVID-19 has sent India's once fast-growing economy into a tailspin. Growth has plunged into negative territory, and the COVID infection numbers are still over 40,000 a day. But the pandemic and the economic disruption have hit the poor the hardest. The country had pulled millions out of poverty only recently, but it's now facing the dire prospect of witnessing millions being pushed back to the margins once again.
Suddenly you find that around 37 million people have fallen back into extreme poverty. What are you going to do?
In the long term, how closely we stick to our objective of reducing absolute poverty, I think that remains an open question.
The situation is awful, continues to be awful.
Can India deal with the dual onslaught of the pandemic and economic disaster at the same time? What more can it do to save millions from the brink of starvation and death?
Mind you, this is from like a liberal publication, so when they're like, it was once fast and growing and prosperous, and now it's horrible again. So take it with a grain of salt. But they do have some interesting kind of information on here.
This is Barpeta, in the eastern state of Assam. It is also one of the country's most backward districts, with a population of 1.6 million. The annual flood havoc has caused severe hardship to the life of residents living in this village. But the COVID-19 pandemic and the subsequent lockdown this year have made the difficult situation even harder to bear. Many families have been pushed to the brink as a result of the current public health crisis, and the situation seems to be getting worse by the day. "35-year-old Fulera Begum now lives in Barpeta with her 3 children. She used to live in Kalija, which is in another part of the district. Her husband was ill at that time, so she sold their home to help pay for her husband's medical treatment. She then moved to Karbali Char with her family about 5 years ago. They took shelter on a neighbor's plot of land. Her life took a turn for the worse after her husband died suddenly just 3 years ago. She then started working in an eatery in the nearest town to help raise her family single-handedly.
Madam, hotel gel mam sini nei shuna gam kol gasir bazar karo kam sini nei kundi. Mai shudin hois kure kire gese kame gese amar 100 টাকা kire hazira disi. Babsi je mela de heta omar. Ami buzi nei ke ওই 100 টাকা kire jodi খাইয়া ভয় বলহান নি আমি চালাইছি আইতে আইতে আমার 7 8টা বাজে গেছে আমি জানি না 7 8টা বাজলে কত রাইতো আমি বুঝি নাই কে।
I just want to pause it here. She said something very important. She said, to earn 100 rupees per day, I had to work until 7 or 8 at night. I didn't understand how late at night 7 p.m. was. These neoliberal idiots are always talking about, if you want to be rich, just work. Just work. All you got to do is work hard, put in 12, 15 hours a day and you'll be rich. She's somebody who's literally working like probably 18, 20 hours a day, getting no sleep, taking care of her kids, getting 100 rupees per day. I don't know what the transaction, the exchange rate is, but that's probably nothing, right?
It would be a little more than $1. So,
oh my God. Dude, you
so
can't even buy like anything.
She would be working like 15, 16 hours a day at least to earn a little more than $1. That's actually poverty line.
What are your thoughts on that, Saheli? Like just the complete inequality. People are working so hard, but they're not getting anything.
Actually, I mean, the inequality increased during the time of the pandemic, just like it increased in all parts of the world. So in India, in the year of the pandemic, in 2020, 73% of the national production went to the top, richest 1%. So that you can understand like how much it actually makes India one of the most unequal countries in the world, So of course, probably the most unequal in the region also, but one of the most unequal in the world also. Like, just imagine in a pandemic year when in 2020 India's production, India's growth actually for a quarter went so much negative, it became like minus 23.9%. So you can understand it was not a growth, it was a destruction. So in that situation, even in that situation, like the 73% of the GDP was going into the hand of the richest 1% only. So like the rest of 99% was earning the 17% that was remaining. So this is the reason why people like her exist. And most of the working people are actually in this sort of situation, and it's even worse for women because women are paid less. There is just this idea that women work less. Actually, that's not true. In India, women are responsible for 2/3 of the production of the country, and they only own around 16% of the national wealth. So
wow.
That is the sort of inequality that exists along the gender line. So you will find that in most cases, in the works that are considered even in like male domain, like construction, like mining, you will see women, they are working, and they of course work as hard as the men and as long as them, but earn like half or 2/3 of what the men earn. And when I say earn, they actually earn like poverty wages. They just earn enough in order to survive, barely survive. So that is the situation, and this is why like she has been working, I will say, like 16 hours a day, earning a little more than $1.
Crazy stuff. That's just insane. And that's such a good point you mentioned about the face of the proletariat is a woman, because you have to point out that, especially in the global South, women undoubtedly work the hardest. They work the most hours. They work some of the most extreme jobs, lowest pay, and they're expected to maintain their household and raise their children. So there is that double oppression, and that's why Mao Zedong would say, women hold up half the sky. And this, to me, like this woman that we're looking at right now on the screen, like this is the face of the working class. Like this is the face of the international proletariat. And this is why it's important to have more women, especially women of color from the global South, to be the face, the representation of socialism, not these weirdo creeps like Vosh, who are out there. These are the people who should be leading our socialist movement, and they are. In India, a lot of women form part of the Communist Party of India, Marxists, and other revolutionary movements. Also, shout out to Comrade Philly. So I highly recommend Arundhati Roy's books on India. They're mostly historical fiction, but paint such a dire picture of India's socio-political cultural history. to present. Saheli, what do you think about Arundhati Roy?
Okay, I would also recommend you all reading her books, because although they may be fiction, they actually do. I mean, you cannot just place fiction anywhere. You have to place them within a society, within context, right? So you will get the context of India from her books, and from of many parts of India actually. Because different parts of India are different. For example, we were talking this since this documentary on Assam came about. We were showing it about Assam, and this woman, she actually lives on well, in Assam, on the Brahmaputra River. There are many within the river. There are islands inside the river because of depositions made by the river. So many people, the poorest people, actually live on those riverine islands that get flooded every year. So what happens is that, who are the people who would be living there? It's not just poor, because I would just also like to connect the caste line, and I should national line along these things. And by nation, I would be talking about different peoples of India, because India is actually a country of different peoples. It's the largest melting pot in the world. We have more than 700 languages here, and each language actually belongs to a nation or a people, as we say. So we have more than 700 peoples in India. So what happened in these parts of in this part of the world, in this part of India, in Assam, is that these people are actually they are actually Bengalis. She is speaking a Bengali dialect, actually, not Assamese. And though I found it very difficult to understand, and I must mention. Anyway, so these people were originally from Bangladesh, but not because of partition. They were once upon a time, Bangladesh was like a part of India, right? And people were moving about everywhere. So this place is actually close to the present border with Bangladesh, and there were also like many other troubles. But anyway, so this person, like her family, may be living in that region for 300, 350 years. Not her family, but people like her, and they were originally placed there by the British. They wanted these people as the workers to be working in the tea plantations. So after the British went away and many of those tea plantations closed down and something like that, these people were dispersed over these regions. And since they had nowhere to go, they would be going to the places where no one would live. So they would live in marshes, they live in the riverine islands. And these people at present are also considered foreigners, although they aren't. There is something called the Foreigners Tribunal in Assam, and it is these poor people actually get tried. And of course, you cannot deport them to Bangladesh because they were never from Bangladesh. So what happens is that in Assam, there are also just like you have kids in cages in close to the southern border of the US, there are that sort of camps, refugee camps made by the government, where they just put these people. Or even like there are cases where one person of the family, one member of the family has been called a foreigner, and maybe his children haven't been called a foreigner. So they send the father away to that camp, leaving the children and wife of that man like orphans, like with nothing. Or they maybe take away children and leave older parents in their homes. So that is the sort of situation that is happening in Assam, and there is no spotlight on this situation, this foreigners tribunal thing.
Crazy, insane. It's just heartbreaking and infuriating, but it's also motivating in terms of understanding the system that we're fighting of neoliberalism, capitalism, racism, and supporting people like this comrade, this sister on the screen. I'm gonna play some more of this.
I see by the eye and the Dixie and Poland get a knack another way that taxi gumay taxi. Got a bit like the ram, labor a secret by it if I supply never gumay with a taxi.
Fulera had 2 daughters and 2 sons. During the lockdown, one of her daughters fell ill. She took her to the hospital in the city, but she couldn't afford the treatment that the doctors prescribed. Her daughter's illness became more complex after she contracted COVID. After a long battle with the illness stretching over months, her daughter died last month. Fulera could not even bring the body of her child back to the village due to the potential risks of exposure to the disease.
করোনা যদি মারা গেছে তাহলে তোর এই মানুষটা সরকারি হয়েছে তোরা তোর এই মানুষটা ছানা হাবি না বা তাকে গ্রামে তো এটা মারিয়ে ছাড়িয়ে দিবার দিব না কেউ ডুবাবো না জানাজাও করবো না তাহলে এই মানুষটা তোরা দেশে নিবি কে নিগে না নিয়ে যদি হিন্দু হয় তাহলে আমরা শ্মশানে জ্বালাইয়া দিম আর যদি মুসলিম হয় তাহলে আমরা নগে হাতে থেকে দাফন করি আমার মায়েরা তাই তা ভুলায় না যে আমি বাঁচবো না তাহলে আমার হুইদ্যা তোমরা দাফন টাফন করো আমার খালি মেয়েটার দাফন করো না আমার হুইদ্যা দাফন করো বাদ ওই ডিসি অফিসার কিনা হিরম মানুষ ভালো হবা তার আয় হাইরে আমার মাথায় পানি ডাললো সুস্থ করলো কবরস্থানে নিল নিয়ে দিয়ে হাইরে আটগাঁও কবরস্থানে হেন সুদা বিলে ওরা তাও ই করলো না কবরটা যে খুঁজলো জেসিবি দিয়ে খুঁজা দিল খুঁজা দিয়ে খালি অনুকার মুন্সি ডুনসি রে কাপনাই ডাপনাইয়া খালি সুদা দইরা নামাইয়া
Fulera's struggle reflects a much bigger problem facing India today. First came COVID in January. Then came the sudden lockdown in March. Millions of hapless, jobless workers started marching on India's roads and highways as the economy ground to a halt. The heart-wrenching scenes unfolding across states sharply brought into focus the inability of the state machinery to deal with a crisis of mammoth proportions. What could the government do? Should it have focused on controlling the virus? Or should it have moved towards opening the economy, ignoring the virus rampaging across the nation? In the end, the government began opening up the economy in phases, even as the virus kept spreading throughout the populous nation. As a result, thousands died from the virus, and millions were pushed to the margins of extreme poverty and destitution.
There is no doubt that the economy has taken quite a hit, like most other economies around the world. As you know, this is the biggest economic shock that the world...
By the way, this guy should be fired. Sanjeev, principal economic... Sanjeev or Sanya? How do you... Sanya, how do you pronounce it?
Yeah, it's okay.
Nah, this guy should be fired, man. He's doing a horrible job. Principal Economic Advisor, Ministry of Finance, India.
Actually, the Minister of Finance should be the first one to be fired.
He should, right? What do you know about this guy? Or like in general, like the BJP government also runs the finance, right, and the economics.
I mean, if the BJP is having the government, of course, it will have the finance minister and everything of the country. So yeah, it's. Actually, I would also like to point out what this documentary said, that there were only two choices, whether to lock the economy down and take care of the health of the people, or whether to open the economy and those were not the two choices. First of all, this crisis, they said that COVID came in January. It didn't. In India, of course, it was coming from February in small amounts, but it was coming from people who were returning from Europe, because in Europe, COVID was already raging in February, right? So people were returning from Europe, and at the beginning, what India should have done is that it should have put these people into quarantine who are coming from Europe, right? But instead of that, they just let them, because they're rich people, right? So they just let them roam. They just let them do anything. At the time, the government did not care that a crisis was brewing in different parts of the world, and at least Europe has better healthcare system, a stronger healthcare system than ours, because for some time there were welfare states in those parts of the world. So some of it still exists. So even that healthcare system was reeling under a crisis, and the government of India was not really caring. They were not really caring what to do about it. They just did not have any plans. So in India, COVID actually started to manifest broadly, like community transmission started around the middle of March. And its community transmissions also started from these slums, I would say. And there is a reason why. because you are also showing child poverty and the picture of slums, I would go to that, because these slums actually exist in just beside the richest parts of the city. So these people of the slums, they actually go into the richest parts of the city and work as housemaids. The women work as housemaids, or they sell things like sell food, or they just work in restaurants and things like that. So in offices, that like they are cleaners in offices and everywhere. So these people, they got the disease from the people who had returned from Europe and were living in those richest parts of the cities. So these people of the slums, they got the disease and it spread like wildfire through these poorest areas of cities first. So it was in like around the middle of March that COVID started spreading like this. And then the government of India, what it did on 24th of March at 8 p.m., just imagine 8 p.m. is night. So at 8 p.m., the prime minister just declared that from midnight there will be complete lockdown of the country. So you just gave a population of 1.4 billion 4 hours in order to prepare for what he said would be 21 days, but it actually turned out to be 2 years of lockdown.
Yeah.
So what happened? Like, who are like? Then you'd see in this documentary, you are also seeing millions of people marching on the streets. Like, why are they marching? There was this question, like, why are these people marching? Where are they going? So, for this reason, I would have to come to the crisis of neoliberalism, and its biggest crisis is that it destroyed the Indian agroeconomy. So, that was what it did. So, agroeconomy is not just agriculture; it's everything related to that. It's the handloom industry. Handloom agriculture is the industry. I would call it industry that employs the largest number of people in the country. And the second largest one would be the handlooms and crafts, art and crafts, and things like that. So when the neoliberalism was first introduced in India in 1991, mark the date because it was just after the fall of USSR. So when neoliberalism was introduced in India, the first thing, the eye of those policies was on the Indian agro sector, and it destroyed the Indian agro economy. You don't have to grow food; you can just buy food from the West. So much what it did was it made agriculture and the entire agroeconomy unviable. People could not earn anything. It just was unprofitable to do agriculture. So it is like according to data from the government of India from census. So from 1991 to 2011, in the first 20 years of neoliberalism, 15 million cultivators stopped cultivating. So when they say cultivators, who do they refer to? They do not even refer to all the people who work in the fields. They actually refer to the farmers who have land titles. So just imagine 15 million cultivators fell out of agriculture. Actually, that number would be like closer to 100 million. Close to 100 million people fell out of the agroeconomy. What did they do? They all went to the cities looking for jobs that do not exist. So these are the people actually who build up the slums. So I mean, India had slums for a long time. Slums were also a creation of colonialism, but after neoliberalism, there was a boom in slums growing up around all the big cities. So even in Kolkata, where you had like a few ones that were famous, you would see those slums expanding, and people from villages were actually like going into the cities, and they were the ones who were then finally what would they do? They would go into people's houses to work as housemaids, as house workers, cleaners, etc. So and the moment there was this lockdown declared, so it was declared with a 4 hour time. Like at 8 p.m., you declare that by 12 midnight, the country will be in lockdown. What happened is that even the people who live in slums, it's not like they just live there. They actually have to give money to the local political goons and people like that. So what happened is that these people who actually let those people live there, they just threw them out of those houses. They just did not let them live. They said that you go and whatever, because they knew that this crisis was going to last far longer and they would not be receiving money. Similarly, the other people who actually rent homes, and when I say rent, they actually there would be in a place where 4 people could live, 15 people live. So that is the sort of way they rent houses with a large amount of money they have to give to landlords and all. Like even in those cases, those landlords, they just uh, expelled those people from those houses within a day or two after the lockdown was declared. So if there was no economy, they could not earn anything. These people could not earn anything either, and they were thrown out of their homes or wherever they lived. So what could they do? They were trying to return to their villages, their original places. And since like the government did not even arrange any transport from them, like the moment it was locked down, public transport was shut down entirely, so they could not access trains. So what they did was they would be walking along the roads. They also walked along railways in order not to get lost, because railways would lead you somewhere. So people would be walking along railways, and there have been incidents where like people were crushed under trains. So this is the sort of thing that happened across the country, and it was only in May, after a lot of pressure, that the government finally made accessible some special trains for those people so that they could return to their villages. By the time, like throughout April, most people had returned. The people who still couldn't, or they were stuck in different parts of the country, they could get on those trains and return to their villages, but the government did not pay the tickets or did not make it free. So in most cases, what happened was that some citizens groups or like political parties that actually think of people, or even concerned citizens, would pay for their passage so that these people could return to their villages. And there were also like deaths of migrants from accidents, from illness, from hunger, from everything.
Damn, that's insane. And the crazy part is that, in a way, neoliberalism is creating a huge genocide in India in so many ways that we're not able to connect the pieces. Ever since I've been young, I've always been fascinated in puzzles and seeing different parts of puzzles and how they connect. And I feel like the genocide of working class people in India is like a puzzle, and we're shown these little pieces, right? Whether it's the farmer suicides. I just had an article up earlier. Farmer suicides in India are through the roof. So many farmers who have committed suicide because of unable to survive, right? You have that. Then you have the environmental stuff. Because of the deregulation of environmental policies and economics, floods are increasing, people are being displaced, so they're forced into the cities, right? And they are no longer able to farm and feed themselves. So now what happens? Now those people from rural farming areas are forced into the slums of urban slums to get a low-wage job that can barely get them any food to eat. The few of them who survive get these low-wage jobs at whether it's a call center or a sweatshop or whatever it is that pays nothing. And so how are they going to feed themselves? The only thing that they can buy that's low wage is McDonald's or KFC, which are entering these markets now. You like from what I remember in Bangladesh, and some comrades have told me in India as well, that you have all these multinational companies, soda, junk food, poison, going into the country, eliminating the diet, the food that was nutritious. Indian food is amazing, by the way. I love Indian food. I can eat Indian food every day. But now a lot of these low-wage workers can't even afford their own food. Now they have to go to these poison factories, McDonald's, KFC, to eat this stuff. Heart disease is going up, diabetes is going up. So now you have low-wage workers who are off their land, who can't even eat their own food, who are forced to consume poison in these urban areas. So it's just like, it's crazy to see that. When I point that out to people, people are like, oh man, you're crazy. Like, you're conspiracy theorist. I'm like, this is a fucking genocide. Like, they're systematically killing poor and working class people in a very, very like methodical way in all these different avenues. And because of neoliberalism, because of capitalism, it's just crazy to me, it's just insane. So I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
Well, yeah, actually, I could say a lot about this. So, firstly, like, there are many different ways, and actually, at present, I'm just like looking at advertisements and things like that, and coming to the conclusion that they're actually trying to push on us this poison and are trying to brainwash us into believing that they are very good. So I mean, McDonald's or KFC are actually not that accessible. They are costly, but uh, what is not costly, and that I should say, is there are things actually that are very interesting and that are also costly, but people are just frightened, brainwashed, or shamed into consuming them. And the first one I should say is baby food. So growing up, we would be eating what our parents eat, only they would make it very soft and stuff like that. That was the only thing that they would do. So, but for millennia, people had not ever consumed what is called baby food. They would be little babies would be subsisting on their mother's milk, and then they would be moving on to food that everyday people consume. Now, what happened, and this is also a, fallout of neoliberalism, or a way of actually just poisoning the population by neoliberalism, is starting around like early 2000s. I'd know about this a bit later because in early 2000s I was a baby child. But anyway, so it's starting around early 2000s. What was started to happening was that doctors would be frightening or shaming mothers into giving their children baby food, telling them that their children are not getting enough food. So that's the first thing. And like little babies would be taken off their mother's milk and go given like all those things that Nestle produces. So I mean, the baby food market in India, at least, is totally by Nestle, and there is also Unilever and a few other companies. And yes, you will be like recognizing all these names because they are also operating in the US and in many parts of the world in the baby food industry. So in India, it's mostly Nestle and Unilever, and then is all this Nan and Nestum and all these things. They're actually all products from Nestle. And then you would realize that the doctors that were prescribing these things to mothers, they were actually mm, bribed by these corporations. And how do they bribe them? Not by money, but by like allowing them to go into conferences in countries like Europe, which conferences these corporations themselves either organize or sponsor, and then like all expenses paid, trips and stuff like that. So that is the way how they bribe the medical system. And let's talk about this because in India the public healthcare system has been destroyed. Like it was never very strong, but even whatever existed since the start of neoliberalism, it has slowly been destroyed. So at present, like people in like, if even if you have anything like a very small something happens to you like a fever, or for example at present in the time of monsoon, in places where it rains a lot, there is a lot of mosquito borne diseases like dengue, like chikungunya, which also happens in Central America. So instead of like you cannot get any treatment in hospitals, but you would have to go to the private doctors, private practitioners in your locality because hospitals would be far away from you, or they would not have enough staff or something like that. So you would go to the private practitioners. In the same way, whatever happens, you have to go to private practitioners. And what they do, they would be prescribing you the things that these corporations bribe them to prescribe you. So that is how the food system is being corrupted from childhood. So children are growing up on this baby formula which we never consumed, like which was never consumed in this parts of the world. Like what on earth is this even? So
Yeah.
and I was looking at it like it's powdered milk. Like you make milk powdered and then you put a lot of sugar in it and some preservatives and say that you are putting supplements, and then they were like,
Dude,
why? So it's
crazy.
of course we know why, it's for profits, but they are like destroying the health of a generation since childhood. And then when people are growing up, there are many advertisements of different drinks that you are supposed to give children so that their bones grow strong and stuff like that. Like it's supposed to contain calcium, and it's supposed to contain the precursors of vitamin D and stuff like that. And then you will see that those things are actually either wheat powder with some supplements added to them, or you will see that they are soy with some supplements added to them like that. And you'll be like, why don't you get that same thing from your food? So there's the way these advertisements go is like, do you know there are 30 different elements that you need every day and you cannot get them from your food? Then where do you get them?
Oh
This
my
is the way
God.
these advertisements go. And
Yeah.
actually, like I said, these private practitioners shame mothers into giving their children, like, don't you want your children to grow up strong and healthy? So that is the way they're saying, and that they are not getting enough good things, like they're not getting enough nutrition from food. So you were just making children dependent on these things. And also these things are made, like these things are colored, and these things are made flavorful and things like that. Of
Mm.
course, that are not very healthy, but because they are so that there is so much flavor, it's so tasty and things like that, children are attracted towards it. Um, it's like an addiction. So that is what is developing. Like in July, I was in a railway station, and I was seeing a child like crying at the feet of her mother, and I was like, what is she begging for? I asked the woman that why is the child crying, and she would say that uh, mm, at the beginning she did not wish to say, but then she said that this child was wanting some potato chips that are actually also sold by Nestle in the
Oh
under the
my
brand name,
God.
Lay's. And it's a was in there are small shops. We still have small shops, we don't have supermarkets that much. So like there was a small shop close by, and she had seen it there, and she knows that her friends ate it, and she wanted to have it, and her mother was not wanting to give her that. And this was also a poor woman, but these things cost. I mean, we know that rice and wheat and stuff like that, vegetables especially, cost a lot, but these things also cost a lot, and they are not good for your health. So you are paying corporations to consume poisons. So of course there are some people who would not like their children to have them, but then you would have teenage children when they're going to school on their own. You would give them some money for transport and things like that, and they would be using that money to eat that thing, despite their parents not wanting them to. So after like, even from like around 30 years of age, people will be obese, people would have diabetes. And in a poor country, poor people having diabetes is such a big burden. Like these people would not be able to access the treatments that they would need. And if someone tells you you are a conspiracy theorist, and if these people are living in the US and Canada, they should
Yeah.
just look at Mexico. They should just look
Yeah.
at Mexico. The same thing has happened there since before India. Like it went into the neoliberal system since 1988, and its agriculture was destroyed starting from 1994. Like a lot before India, Indian agriculture system still exists. India still has a public distribution system of food, although that has been its scope has been reduced a lot. Still, India has a food corporation of India that has the duty to ensure that the people of India can access the minimum calorie requirement. Well, the equivalent of food corporation in Mexico was dismantled by neoliberalism. It has still not been recovered. And like in the 2000s, the uh, Secretary of Public Education, School Education of Mexico opened schools to these corporates, like to Nestle, to other corporates that actually, to McDonald's and stuff, that actually provide them school lunches. And you can imagine what lunches they provide in schools. So we still have cooked food as lunches in school, still have that. I mean, there is a lot of push to privatize that and to give it over to the corporates, because these McDonald's, all these corporates are lobbying hard and pouring a lot of money into these lobbying efforts in order to privatize all these things, to open up children's health and things like that. So I mean, uh, like if anyone tells you are a conspiracy theorist, tell them to look at Mexico.
Most definitely. And shout out to Comrade Philly. Inorganic GMO filled crap is a big part of the new techno feudal existence being pushed by the World Economic Forum, coupled with lack of ownership of land resources. You will own nothing and be happy. Yeah, it's crazy. And I'm gonna give you guys nightmares tonight. This is a little cartoon of Ronald McDonald feeding a burger. This is like some really satanic shit. Like when I see McDonald's, I think of this. Like just their branding, their targeting of children. It's some really demonic stuff. The mind. They even hired psychologists, child psychologists, to try to tap into child psychology. Like it's crazy. I remember hearing, the commercial, the McDonald's commercial. They go ba da ba ba ba. Like even that little jingle that triggers a response in the brains of kids. Like I want McDonald's. Like there's kids that know the word McDonald's before they even know the name, their last name, or the names of their family, but they know McDonald's. This shit goes like deep into your head for children, and this is why, I tell people like this is why neoliberalism, capitalism, imperialism. It's not just economic. That at its root, it's an economic base and structure, but it takes so many wings, and I think the biggest wing of that in the modern society is media and propaganda and how they seep into our minds. And just kind of wrapping up here, Comrade Saheli, because I know you have to head out and it's late. We're in Venezuela right now, but I have a clip of this is ever since with colonization, neoliberalism, and capitalism in India. There's been a prevalence of what they call fairness creams in India that try to make you look whiter. So I'm going to play this clip. It's just a compilation of some commercials, and we'll wrap up talking about the psychology of colonization, of neoliberalism and capitalism.
अरे सुधा, ये तेरे चेहरे को क्या हुआ? हाँ? तुम्हें चाहिए 9x.
चेहरे पे रौनक लाइए सिर्फ 9 सेकंड में. फॉरेन पासपोर्ट दैट साइड मैम.
तुसी की कह रहे हो जी?
हाँ? आज ही 9x अपनाइए.
New Pond's White Beauty, now with lycopene, gives your skin a radiant pinkish white glow. Pond's White Beauty, pale white or pinkish white, you choose.
भैया फिर से मेरी सारी फेयरनेस क्रीम खत्म कर दी.
मर्द होकर लड़कियों वाली क्रीम.
छुप छुप कर काहे को लड़कियों की क्रीम लगाए. उनकी त्वचा है कोमल कोमल और तुम्हारी रफटा त्वचा नहीं उनके जैसी. क्यों ना समझ तुम्हारे.
इमामी फेयर एंड हैंडसम आम फेयरनेस क्रीम मर्दों की सख्त त्वचा में नहीं समा पाते. सिर्फ फेयर एंड हैंडसम में है अमेरिकन डबल स्ट्रेंथ पेप्टाइड और जड़ी बूटियां जो अंदर समाए और गोरा बनाए 4 हफ्तों में.
इमामी फेयर एंड हैंडसम, दुनिया की नंबर 1 फेयरनेस क्रीम फॉर मेन.
Crazy stuff. I watched that. It looks like a spoof to me. Like, those like comedy movies where they're joking around and it's like a fake commercial. Like I saw that. I'm not gonna lie. Like again, not to sound too conspiratorial or crazy, but like I saw that and I just felt like evil. You know what I'm saying? Like that felt so dark. Like just the way, like holy shit, because most of India does not look that light skinned. So what are your thoughts on that and how that ties in as well with the economic, the capitalist exploitation in India?
Yeah, it's actually like minds being colonized, right? So when we talk about decolonization, we just don't need to decolonize our political and economic systems. We also need to decolonize our brains, our psychology, everything. So yeah, like these sort of advertisements, actually they were more prevalent earlier. Even now they exist, but what happens is that they have changed their language a bit and they say that no, you don't become fair, your skin just becomes brighter, and like they have like exfoliation properties, and they would like get rid of the dead cells, so your skin will look brighter. And this actually came about after a lot of lawsuits against them, pointing out the racism and also the fact that they were targeting women. Like they targeted men a lot later. There is one advertisement on men, but these are mostly targeted on women because like in any patriarchal society, the burden is on women to be everything at the same time, so to look nice, to do a lot of things, and to be but like, to be able to be a hard worker and also look like a goddess. So that is the sort of thing that is that is expected from women in a patriarchal society. And this idea of fairness, it's, of course, one could say that it's a remnant of colonialism, but it was actually reinforced by colonialism. It existed from beforehand. Let's remember that the first out of Africa migration was in India, in the Indian subcontinent. So the base of Indians is African. Okay, and then there were all the later evolutions that occurred of the Indian population. Most of that was darker people. Of course, then there were people coming into India from everywhere. So like for example, I have ancestors from Syria, and then there like that's a common thing in Bengal, in these parts of Bengal and some parts of eastern India. Then there are the Aryans, who were actually Caucasians, or actually from the steppes of the foothills of the Caucasus. So they were a lot whiter, like lot fairer people. The people from the Middle East were also a lot fairer than the people who were already existing in India. And since the caste system was created during the time of the Aryans, which was the later period of the Aryans, and they were fairer. Uh, of course, they had mixed with Indians, and they were not as white as their ancestors, but still, there were a lot of them were fairer. So the caste system, when it was divided, the caste system in India is called Varna, which means color. So you would see that these higher castes were also fairer and the lower castes are also darker. So in any system at any point of time, it's not just for capitalism, but any system, all the dominant ideologies will be of the dominant class. So at that time when the Aryans were dominant, everything that was Aryan should be something that everyone should try to achieve. Similarly, at present, like since colonialism, everything that is Western, that is white, is something that we should be trying to achieve. That's the basic idea. So yes, even when children are born, people would say, "Oh, your child is so dark, you won't be able to get this child married," especially for women. So that's very common to hear actually, and it's like it's everywhere. Like I have heard it from many people, like for her children have been born and they're like, or they like I am actually among the fairer people, and people say, okay, you must be having a very easy life. I'm like, no. But anyway, that's
They're like
actually,
Saheli's chilling. She has a good life. She's
I am chill
that's
because I am
crazy.
fair,
Right.
Anyway, so
What's
yes,
great that's
these
crazy.
ideas were like these advertisements were targeted at women, especially in the 2000s. Like since everybody would like to marry a fair girl and stuff like that, women would be buying these things and putting them on their skin. Now they are not actually very good for skin either. Like who knows what is in them, right? So, and of course they don't do what they promise to do. Of course, like how they are not going to bleach your skin. So people, of course, did not become fair, and of course, it was very racist. Like to say that the way the advertisements are shown, they are very racist, and they are also like misogynist and everything. So in West Bengal, like the former government of West Bengal, which was a government led by the Communist Party of India, Marxist. So the chief minister, like the second chief minister of that government, Mr. Buddhadev Bhattacharya, actually actually made a law, brought a law in the West Bengal State Assembly in order to restrict these advertisements. Of course, many media were calling that he was he was trying to curb freedom of expression, but what he was trying to do was he was trying to curb racism. So there were also court cases by many women and women's organizations and general social rights groups, etc., saying that these advertisements were racist and misogynist. They were targeting women into spending money on things like this instead of like focusing on their lives and things like that. They're also making women depressed and all sorts of things. So finally, which was very recent, like 2-3 years ago, the Supreme Court of India actually said that no advertisement can promote racism. And then after that time, they changed the language, make it more woke. Okay, and they said that they changed the idea of, for example, that advertisement, the first one that you showed, in which the person actually became like a white European, like even
Yeah.
her hair color, like how can that
She was
happen?
like,
So that's so, of course, that is an expression of racism. And
yeah,
so since the court had said this, they had to change their language. They still target the same demographic, but they have changed their language. And since this, at the same time, there has been a boom in the wellness industry and the skincare and all these things. Okay, so people actually look at this, took as these things in YouTube and other places, in Instagram, etc. Will look at whatever skincare routines all the celebrities follow. And of course, nobody has that amount of money,
yeah,
neither nor can they access the professionals that they can. So what they try to do is take shortcuts, because these companies promote these shortcuts, that okay, you don't have to have access to those professional skincare experts and things like that. You can just use our cream, use our shampoo, and you will have this glowing skin and like a glowing mane of hair and things. So
crazy.
that is also uh, that is a remnant of colonialism, and that's also neoliberalism. It's like targeting your mind, because you say that
Hmm.
psychology is a main thing. So they would target your psychology. That idea is that if anything that is Western, anything that comes from the land of the colonizers is nice, is better, is more civilized, and things like that. So you have to try to achieve that, and in order to achieve that, you would have to do everything possible, because otherwise, how would India become a superpower? Unless you try to be like, be like the US, for example.
Yeah, most definitely. Wow, so much, dropping so much knowledge, Comrade Saheli. Before we go, I just quickly want to share this one picture. I think you'll. I don't know if I showed you this picture before. This is a picture when I was in Bangladesh. I was in Dhaka, and
Yeah.
this is me right there. I don't know if you can see me. I got my flip flops, true
Yeah, I
Bengali
can see
style.
it.
I got the slacks and the flip flops. Uh, all the way right here on the right with the red glasses, and this was with the Socialist Students Front,
Mhm.
Bangladesh. It was cool. It was such a beautiful experience, and there was a lot of comrades there from India as well. A really good comrade I met. Her name was Suchita. She was from New Delhi, and I think she was with an Indian. I forget which party she was with, but she was really awesome. She shed a lot of light to me about the struggle in India as well. One of the most amazing events. Like I love Latin America. Don't get me wrong. I've been to a lot of Latin American countries, and I love the left in Latin America. But I feel like the left in South Asia and India, Bangladesh, like they're just such on a next level of organization and like mobilization. Like at this like you can't tell from this picture because it's just like the front row, but there was literally like 3,000 people behind us. Like it was a sea of red, and that was probably like the biggest like communist rally I've ever been to. And it was a lot of fun. It was such a cool experience. So
Well, we
that's
have
to say,
huge population, so
oh,
like
that's true. Yeah, you guys got
Bengali also has a huge population compared to the size. So any rally you'd have
that's
like
true.
thousands of people. You don't need to worry.
Anywhere, yeah, you go to a
Yeah,
coffee, you go to a
unless
coffee
it's a
shop. There's
million,
thousands of people. Yeah,
unless it's a million, it's not a
yeah.
big rally.
Unless, yeah, oh, only 1 million people showed up. It wasn't a big protest. It was pretty small,
This
you
is a
know.
debate. Like, yeah, 70,000. Yeah, okay, that's fine. But that's not the
Right,
biggest I have been to. Like,
right,
so
right.
yeah, like
Let me
yeah,
see.
I can imagine, and we actually have this kind of like yeah, we have this kind of thing. Like I'm of course joking about the size, but in if you have rallies which are led by social movements, you would have even more people because that's a broader front, right? It's a broader platform than in case of just political parties, or even this was just the socialist student front, like the one student organization. So of course one does not expect 30,000 people there, but one could expect, for example, in the farmers protests are still going on, by the way. So in the farmers protests you had like 3-4 million people just sitting around Delhi, and you had many more millions all over India in their support, because India is a big country. It's like a continent. It's very difficult to travel from one part to another. It takes a long time and money, So uh, even then, like those protests, for example, in Kolkata, there were huge ones, and Bengal is actually an agricultural state. It's also partly industrial, but it's mainly an agricultural state, like most of India. And people have been hurt, just like they have been hurt, like agriculturists have been hurt all over India. In West Bengal, also, people have been hurt. And I must mention one thing, that in one of the main axis of the farmers protest, that like of last year, which got broadcast a lot, was that the government was trying to scrap the Essential Commodities Act, or was trying to amend it. The Essential Commodities Act uh, actually ensures that individual distributors cannot hoard goods above a certain limit. So they are trying to, that law was enacted in 1955 in order to prevent hoarding of goods and scarcity of goods in the markets. However, in West Bengal, like in my state, and the current government that is there, it amended the State Act of Essential Commodities. And what happened is that farmers were forced to sell their, like West Bengal is known for rice and potato production a lot. So they were forced to sell their produce to the people who own the cold storages or who own the rice mills. So these people were hoarding these things. They were making scarcities. They were making prices go up in the market. And then when the government, like there is a system of the government procuring these goods directly from farmers. That is what the Food Corporation of India does, like one of the tasks of that thing, of that body. So when they were procuring these goods, farmers did not have them. They had already been forced to sell it to the cold storage owners, to the owners of rice mills. So these people sold it to the government and got the money from the government. So they were already rich people, and they got richer off the government. And the government does not have money from anywhere. It's people's money, right? So it is a transfer of wealth from poor people to rich people. Capitalism is just that. So like it had created scarcities, it had made prices go through the roof, it had created inflation. There is still double digit inflation in India, by the way, on food items. And even after all that, these rich people were getting rich off the government. So of course people would protest, and of course you will have millions of people protesting against this.
Crazy. Damn. It's crazy stuff. Kamra Saheli, thank you so much for joining us. It's been a real pleasure having you on. I'd love to have you back on soon. Maybe at some point we can do something on Venezuela, because you live in you're in Venezuela right now, and it's so amazing to learn about India. I think more people need to learn about what's going on, especially in Latin America and the Caribbean, because there's so much in common. There's so much interconnection, and there's so much that we can work on together and fighting the same system, because it's so similar. Everything you're saying right now about India, I'm sure you've seen it to yourself too. There's so many parallels to Latin America and the Caribbean. So I really appreciate having you on. Please, everybody, subscribe to Orinoco Tribune. Show them some love on YouTube. So hit the subscribe button. Follow their social media, and also check out the publication. Amazing content on there. Orinoco Tribune. Kamra Saheli, thank you so much. I really appreciate you, and I'd love to chat with you soon. Take care. Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot to you, and thanks to everyone who has been watching, commenting, and who would be watching later and everything. And of course, thanks for the shout out to Orinoco Tribune. That's very necessary. Of course, we aren't that active on YouTube, but the website, please try to follow orinocotribune.com. It's English news from Venezuela, from Latin America, and also from other parts of the world. So anyone interested in knowing things directly from Venezuela could just go into the website and see things and share it with people. So thanks a lot, Ramiro, and thanks a lot to everyone.
Thank you so much, Saheli. Peace out, everybody. We're going to go out to some Inti Ilimani. Peace out, y'all. Take care.
Para hacer esta muralla, tráiganme todas las manos, tráiganme todas las manos, los negros sus manos negras, los blancos sus blancas manos. Una muralla que vaya sobre el horizonte. Primerita, bueno. Y un clavel abre la muralla, el sable del coronel cierra la muralla, la paloma y el laurel abre la muralla, el gusano y el cien pies cierra la muralla, al corazón del amigo abre la muralla, al veneno y al puñal cierra la muralla, al grito y la hierba buena. Serpiente